Good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Hamilton. I'm the Chief Executive of Belfast Chamber, and you're all very welcome to our event this morning, which is the official launch of our research report entitled Empowering Belfast. During today's event, we're going to hear from Watt of local independent think tank Pivotal, who Belfast Chamber commissioned to do this work, and is going to give us a summary of the key points in the research. We're also going to hear from Ben Houchen, who is the Mayor of Tees Valley, about local decision making and devolution and what it is doing to his region in the northeast of England. And then once we've heard from Ben, we're going to have a bit of a discussion panel around some of the themes that have come out of the report and perhaps what Ben Houchen says as well. And we're going to be joined by Ben Harper, who's the research manager at Pivotal, and also by Lisa O'Kane, who's head of investment, performance and improvement at the Northern Ireland Local Government Association, and Lee Reynolds, former Belfast City Councillor and also former special advisor to First Minister. And so just by way of maybe setting a bit of context as to why Belfast Chamber commissioned this research, some of you will recall our Belfast Forward conference back in February of 2020. That event was built around three different themes: people, place, and process. The third of those, process, looked at how New York has used different delivery mechanisms and vehicles to transform the city over around a period of about 20 years or so. How a city is governed is probably seems something quite niche or a nerdy subject, but as we saw at our conference, you can have all the ambition, vision that you want, but it's pretty worthless if you can't deliver on it. Cities everywhere are governed differently because they are recognized as being different, having very different requirements. Yet Belfast, the economic engine of our entire region, has the weakest form of local government anywhere in the whole of the UK. As the voice of business in Belfast, Belfast Chamber wants to see our city grow, regenerate, and reach its full potential to the benefit of all of our citizens. Belfast definitely doesn't lack ambition, but it does lack power. We look enviously at our city, other cities in the UK, cities that are our competitors for jobs and talent, investment, and we're observing as they become increasingly empowered and develop new and innovative ways of regenerating their cities and addressing deep-seated economic and social issues. So Belfast Chamber commissioned Pivotal to study the differences in evolved decision-making in cities across the UK and to consider what lessons that we in Belfast might learn as we seek to create a stronger, more empowered city. So today we're delighted to launch Empowering Belfast. It's a thorough study of those aforementioned differences and the sections on combined authorities and vehicles like mayoral development corporations and free ports give us plenty of food for thought. Belfast Chamber hopes that this report can spark a conversation about evolved decision-making in Belfast and indeed right across Northern Ireland. How we govern cities like Belfast or wider city regions is something that we can debate and discuss. But what this report demonstrates is that if we are to continue to compete and also prepare ourselves properly for future challenges, then we do need to empower Belfast. So I'm not going to say any further. I'm going to hand over to Anne Watt. Anne is, as I mentioned before, the director of Pivotal, who carried out this research on Belfast Chamber's behalf. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Anne to give us a summary of some of the key findings. Anne.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to present Pivotal's findings from our recent research into the role of devolved decision-making in UK cities. Pivotal is an independent public policy think tank, and we were pleased to be commissioned by Belfast Chamber to do this research project on how economic decision-making powers in Belfast compare to other cities across the UK. So my name is Anne Watt. I'm the director of Pivotal. Also with us today is Dr. Ben Harper, who led this research, and he'll take part in the Q&A session later. The research involved a rigorous review of available policy and research evidence. The team consulted with key stakeholders in Belfast, Liverpool and Glasgow to explore existing models and test out ideas for greater devolution that might apply in the Belfast context. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to give you an overview of the research, including a brief description of local councils' powers at present in Northern Ireland and in other cities in the UK. In so doing, I'm going to focus on economic powers, for example, regeneration, infrastructure and business development, rather than the wider set of powers that and responsibilities that councils have. I'll give you a quick summary of our case studies in Manchester, Tees Valley and Glasgow, and I'll finish by talking about the main conclusions in our research about the key differences between Belfast and other cities and where there might be a need for change. And finally, I'll suggest some questions for discussion. So, okay, so to avoid any confusion, just to start with, when we talk about devolution in this report and in this presentation now, we're referring to powers being devolved from the Northern Ireland Executive to local councils, rather than from the UK government to the Northern Ireland Executive, which might be the normal way we'd be used to talking about devolution. And when we talk about devolved powers, we're talking about who's making the decisions and who has control of the budgets. And most people will be aware that for councils across the UK, that varies quite a lot. So 2 points jump out really quickly if we just glance across at other cities in the UK. First, there's been a trend towards much increased devolution in the last 15 years, with cities in England particularly gaining increased powers and control over budgets. And second, there's been little change in Northern Ireland during this period, with councils already having had, even before this, a much more limited range of responsibilities than cities elsewhere. So in Northern Ireland, councils' responsibilities include planning and building control, and some local economic powers like business support and tourism. However, broader economic strategy sits with the Northern Ireland Executive through the Department for the Economy. Roads and transport belong with the Department for Infrastructure, and regeneration powers are held by the Department for Communities. Regeneration powers, people might know, were due to be given over to local councils in 2016, but that didn't happen. So overall, we have a situation where the powers and the budgets of local councils in Northern Ireland are limited, with the Northern Ireland Executive determining where decision-making power should sit. So most decisions on economic and infrastructure issues are taken by the Executive rather than more locally. And that means that local councils here have limited ability to lead significant regeneration due to a lack of both decision-making authority and devolved budgets. In England, councils have a much broader range and depth of powers, for example, education, social care, public health, transport, housing and planning. And in addition to that standard set of responsibilities, in recent years, new legislation in England has allowed many councils to avail of new opportunities to increase local decision-making. That can come in a variety of forms, and in the report we set out the main examples. So, for example, there are over 30 city deals across the UK, including, of course, the Belfast City Region deal. City deals are bespoke packages of funding and powers agreed between central government and councils and other local bodies. Combined authorities in England allow a group of councils to act together to make collective decisions across council boundaries, along with devolution of some powers that might previously be held by central government. Combined authorities are in place, for example, in Greater Manchester, Liverpool City Region, Tees Valley and West Yorkshire. Enterprise zones are another example. These are designated areas that offer tax breaks, for example, business rate reductions or capital allowances for investment, plus simplified planning arrangements. And free ports are similar to enterprise zones in a way. They are a special kind of port that are exempt from typical tax and custom rules. 8 new free ports were announced by the UK government in the 2021 budget. So to give you a little idea of our case studies, and there's much more about these in the report, we looked at Greater Manchester, Tees Valley and Glasgow. There are a number of other areas which would have been really good examples to look at, but just we settled on these 3 for time and space reasons. So Greater Manchester is the combined authority that has seen the greatest set of powers devolved outside of London, including health and social care. The corporate strategy places emphasis on creating economically and socially vibrant communities with accountable leadership. Tees Valley Combined Authority has a 10-year investment plan worth 588 million to deliver a high-value, low-carbon economy, generating new jobs, integrated transport and promotion of innovation and entrepreneurial activity. And Glasgow City Region City Deal is worth a total of 1.13 billion, with a focus on infrastructure, innovation and employment projects. It's important to emphasise that in all of these case studies, and indeed other areas, they're all very different. It's a case of local council leaders coming together to develop a plan for the issues that matter most in their local areas, and then agreeing a package of powers and funding with central government. There certainly isn't one model that fits all areas. And although the details of each of the deals vary, a common feature is working together with neighbouring councils on issues that apply across local boundaries. And this enhances the ability of the region to speak with one voice to central government, increasing the potential for change. So some learning and implications. So having explored these different situations in cities across the UK, and particularly looking at the comparison with Belfast, the report offers some learning to help kick off a wider conversation. So first, and fairly obviously, existing decision-making powers for councils in Northern Ireland are narrow compared to other areas. Increased devolution to local areas in England has been the outcome of many years of lobbying for change, resulting in 3 significant legislative reforms. There's not been similar pressure for change in Northern Ireland. Planning powers were devolved to councils here in 2014, but the anticipated transfer of regeneration powers did not happen due to a lack of agreement in both the executive and the assembly. It may be that the examples provided in this report provide a useful menu of options of ways to increase devolution in Northern Ireland. Some powers may lend themselves more readily to devolved decision-making than others. Secondly, more localised decision-making has the potential to drive regeneration. A key lesson from the case studies is that decision-making at a local level can mean councils are able to drive forward local priorities, which might not be as pressing or even visible at a national level. This can, for example, contribute to addressing inequalities across a local area through projects that help spread innovation and growth. Examining all of the case studies has clearly demonstrated that strong leadership is central to change. So over years, leaders in councils in England pressed for greater devolution of powers. The localised decision-making that has resulted is reliant on collaborative and engaging leadership, both within each council and between neighbouring councils. At present, decision-making about Belfast lies within multiple Northern Ireland executive departments, and with a limited coherent strategy for change. It may be that the new Belfast City Region deal can provide a useful testbed for greater partnership between councils, universities, business partners, and the executive. Our research has explored the range of options available if more powers were to be devolved here. There may be value in pursuing Freeport or enterprise zone status to provide incentives for businesses to locate in Belfast, with a focus on growing particular sectors, and that could act as an important catalyst for development as we emerge from the pandemic. And then final point here, in the absence of strong and ambitious policy leadership by the executive, there may be an opportunity for local councils to have an enhanced role in policy developments. Councils may have the local knowledge, ambition and expertise to lead on areas of regeneration where the executive has not provided effective solutions. Further work is needed to determine what particular powers it might be most beneficial to transfer to local councils. In the discussion that's coming up, I'd be really interested to hear views from you about whether these are the appropriate lessons to take away, if there are other important things to learn, how these points apply in the particular context of Belfast, and what, if any, next steps might be appropriate as if we think policy change is needed. So just as I finish, I want to say my thanks to Belfast Chamber for commissioning this research from Pivotal. It's been a pleasure to work with you, Simon, and to have the opportunity to explore these important issues. We hope that we produced an interesting and useful report that helps inform discussions on possible policy change. Pivotal is available for future commissioned research projects. from Belfast Chamber and of course from other organisations if anybody is keen to talk to us about that. My personal thanks to Dr. Ben Harper, Pivotal's Research Manager, who has led this project, and to our research assistant, Henry Wilkinson Roberts, for many hours of detailed work getting a grip on the complexities of devolved decision-making in different cities. The point of this research is to stimulate debate about what, if anything, needs to happen in terms of policy change to enable Belfast to grow and thrive. This report deliberately doesn't provide a blueprint for change, but instead it sets out important evidence from here and elsewhere to help inform the debate. So I leave you with the questions for discussion at the end of the report. What devolved powers would Belfast and/or the wider city region benefit from? Is there a role for enterprise zones or free ports to assist with the regeneration of Belfast? How does Belfast need to respond as other competitor cities gain greater powers over economic development, infrastructure and regeneration? And finally, would there be public support for devolving more powers to local councils? I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was a really, really useful summary of the report. And obviously, there's a lot more than that in the report, and people can go to our website, belfastchamber.com, and they can download a copy and read at their leisure. Thank you, Anne, to you and the team for your work in producing this. Anne mentioned that the case studies, and one of those case studies that we looked at was Tees Valley, and a part of the northeast of England, which has similar challenges to Belfast in terms of dealing with industrial decline and a region that's trying to bounce back from the loss of many big manufacturing businesses over recent decades. So they have had a directly elected mayor and a combined authority for the last 4 years. And last week I was able to catch up with Ben Houchen, who is the recently re-elected mayor for Tees Valley, to ask him to give us a bit more of a flavour of how devolution is working in his region and what lessons can be learned for Belfast. So we're going to play that interview now. Thank you. So perhaps, Ben, if you could maybe give us a bit of an understanding. Tees Valley is one of the case studies that features in our Empowering Belfast report, so people can see a little bit more detail on that. But perhaps you could expand on how the combined authority works and what you're doing in the Tees Valley area, and how devolution is bringing advantages to your region.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the very simple thing to think of for devolution purposes and what combined authorities do across England at the moment, where there are opportunities elsewhere, is that in effect we are a politically accountable regional development agency. So it's the old RDA system, but political accountability. And I'm directly elected by people across the region, which is, the Tees Valley is 750,000 people. So when you think in those terms, the Tees Valley Combined Authority and myself as mayor are responsible for anything that's linked to job creation. So that is direct support for businesses with the intermediary body for things like ERDF and the Replacement Shared Prosperity Fund. You've got things like transport, you've got the post-19 skills agenda. We are the Transport Authority as well. And obviously we are a great link into a region. So one of the things that's happens, not just because I'm the mayor, but this happens across any mayorality, is that when you have big international business looking to invest in a region, it's a bit like the old adage from the old American presidents: when you want to ring Europe, who do you call? It's the same for a region, right? They don't want to speak to a local council or an MP, or who's the leader of a council, what does the council do, does it cover the area I want it to? They can go to somebody on a regional level who is responsible primarily for that regional economic development and see if they can do a deal to bring that investment to them. So fundamentally, that's what we do. It's going particularly well in the Tees Valley, I think, compared to elsewhere, and hopefully we can continue that into the future.
Yeah, and that point of leadership, I suppose, I mean, that's something that's been a really strong and consistent theme throughout the research that will have done on our behalf, and whether it's Tees Valley or Manchester or Liverpool, but that kind of convening power that a mayor has, that ability to coordinate those kind of critical economic functions that you were outlining is coming through really strong. How crucial is that, just having that single point of contact almost for a region? How crucial has that been to the success that you've been having in Tees Valley recently?
Well, it's extremely important. One, because as a devolved mayor, we have powers and money available to us that other areas don't have. And so it's one thing to have those powers, but again, individual businesses and the private sector need to understand how to engage with it. And so having a regionally elected mayor, especially on the, like I said, we're one of the smaller areas of 750,000 people, Manchester's over 3 million people, then having that politically directly elected person to go to creates that leadership around the money and the powers that come locally. So one doesn't really work without the other. It'll be interesting to see where the government go with their levelling up white paper, because one of the conversations going on at the minute is, can you give more devolution to counties, for instance, without having a directly elected mayor? And my personal opinion is you can't, because you in effect only get half of the benefit. The powers and money are one thing, but having, like I say, it's very private sector orientated. So if you're a chief exec of a business like GE that we've attracted to Teesside, they want to sit down with an equivalent and see whether they can do a deal. What they don't want to do is engage with the public sector in the traditional sense. They don't quite understand or know how to navigate. So those two things coming together, and that leadership point of having somebody that's directly elected and ultimately responsible for that specific thing within the region, is underestimated a lot as a piece of soft power rather than a hard power.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sort of political accountability, and again, this is something that has come through quite strongly. It was I think a significant moment for me when I was looking through our research, that one of the key things that seems to be different about combined authorities is that there is a separation, a split, I suppose, between the powers that they enjoy. So you mentioned that it's very much economic growth and innovation and regeneration and infrastructure focused, and a lot of the other things that can sometimes be a little bit, I'm not saying that politics is divorced from combined authorities, obviously it's not, but you don't have a situation where local authorities are having to make trade-offs between social care or play park provision or something like that, and investing in economic growth and investment in infrastructure and regeneration. So it's that having combined authorities created with that, that's their whole raison d'etre, is to do that, and the other stuff is still handled by local authorities. Is that split separation important, actually, in sort of taking it away from those things that might derail your agenda or distract it or stop it, and you're just very singularly focused on the economy?
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That one of the big benefits of why combined authorities are working at the moment, not everywhere, some of them aren't doing particularly well, but the ones that are doing well do well because we're focused. And with the greatest respect to local authorities, local authority leaders and councillors, they have a very difficult job emptying bins, filling potholes, social services, children's services, and they've got a huge breadth of issues that they have to deal with. They have limited budgets as well, and they have to prioritise those statutory requirements. Now, with devolution, yes, you get some powers, but what you ultimately get is money that wouldn't have otherwise come into a region, and it's focused specifically on those economic regeneration points. So really what we do is we do the heavy lifting, that where there isn't devolution deals, we're doing the heavy lifting that local authorities would otherwise have to have done, but they don't have the teams in place, they don't have the resources to be able to do it properly and engage with the private sector. So there is a great dovetailing together. We don't replace what local authorities do, and the devolution as it currently stands is about taking powers away from the centre and bringing them down to the region. What devolution doesn't currently do, albeit it doesn't necessarily mean it won't do it in the future, is it doesn't currently take powers away from local authorities and raise them up to a regional level. And that's the important thing. It's how do you bring powers back from Whitehall and London to the regions, empower the regions, not de-empower or unempower or whatever the phrase is, but not take powers away from the local area and make it more remote from local people. This is about trying to take those decisions as close to the people as possible. But again, the thing you hit the nail on the head on was focus. The biggest issue facing devolution in the future, especially where there are existing deals, is not making them too big and cumbersome and making them too broad. It's the focus that actually makes us successful.
I think that's a really interesting point. A lot of people who are listening might think of in a Belfast context, that this is why would we take powers away from, if at some stage we wanted to combine the powers of those councils that are involved in the city deal in the Belfast region, that taking powers away. It sounds like it's more about an enhancement and actually helping local authorities to actually achieve and deliver on the big regeneration infrastructure projects that they think are important to their localities.
Oh, definitely. And if I could wave a magic wand, and if I was in charge many moons ago before we started discussing Scottish devolution. I think the better structure for Scottish devolution would have been for city regions rather than having a full devolved government, because actually giving, really, why should Edinburgh be deciding what's going on in Glasgow? Why wouldn't you empower Glasgow City Region and Edinburgh City Region to do the same thing? I mean, there are parallels. Obviously, everything is unique, but there's similarities there to Northern Ireland. You could easily have a Belfast City deal. You can have other regions within Northern Ireland that you're not taking away from the local areas, you're not taking away from the local authorities, but you're bringing powers back from the centre to empower local decision-making. But let's be honest as well, while devolution is a positive thing and you are having more control and say over your own region, it's surprising how much time I still have to spend in London speaking to the centre. So it's not a solution, but it's on the right path to more autonomy.
That's an interesting point. Tees Valley is also, I suppose, in the vanguard around different vehicles of delivery as well. So you'd secured one of the government's first free ports. You've used enterprise zones, and these types of vehicles in the past have maybe had a bad name. They've been seen as a sort of voguish and faddish, and they come and they go. But you've really seized on, particularly onto the free ports, which is something that the current government has made a big thing about, and the Chancellor has towards the top of his agenda. So why did you pursue those as vehicles, and how are they working out in terms of delivering that sort of regenerative change, whether it's in town centres like Stockton and Tees or the huge free port that you're developing?
So you've got to use every lever that's available to you, and what you look at, or what I look at in the way that I run this job, is what levers will help me deliver more private sector investment? How do I lower the barrier to investment, de-risk it for the private sector to come here, as in the Tees Valley, rather than not just elsewhere in the UK, but elsewhere in the world? And we've got huge amounts of land available. We've got the biggest brownfield site in Western Europe, 4,500 acres, 6 times the size of the City of London. We've got 14 million square feet of approved planning in place for that. We're doing all of that work to say to an investor, there's a 100-acre site, the planning's already in place, you're ready to go, do you want to start building? Oh, and by the way, you don't have to pay employers' national insurance contributions for 5 years, you don't have to pay any business rates for 5 years, you don't get any SDLT, uncapped capital allowances, and all of a sudden that adds up, right? And we see that in the landing of GE building their new offshore wind blade factory in Teesside. That's an 830,000 square feet factory. It's going to employ 2,000 people. And the Freeport was the big difference between them coming to Teesside rather than expanding their existing facility in Cherbourg in France. And actually, when I started out on the Freeport journey, just after I was elected in 2017, trying to sell to the government that Freeports could be a huge positive following Brexit, one of the things that we used as a great case study was actually Shannon Airport, and using the idea that the types of free ports that we have in the UK now and could grow towards even more are the types of free ports that you can only have outside the European Union. And Shannon is such a great example because, they had what actually was probably the world leading free port before Jebel Ali in the Middle East. And that has been diluted and watered down year in, year out because of European membership. And it's how do you reinvigorate that? And how do you, rather than imposing it from the centre, through devolution, how do you empower local regions to say, this is the best fit for us, government, so help us get to this juncture? And that's a really nuanced point, but an important one. This isn't about London deciding whether Belfast or any part of Northern Ireland should have a free port. It's about, if you had a devolution deal or a number of devolution deals in Northern Ireland, it's about the local area coming forward and saying, we want a free port because these are the benefits that we know it will bring. And actually what you find then is the centre is much more amenable to working with local areas who come forward with the solutions rather than feeling like the solutions are always imposed from the centre. And we've seen that because we drove the free port agenda. We in effect created the policy for the UK government. And there is no reason why other devolved areas or future devolved areas couldn't actually be coming up with solutions to help UK PLC rather than it always feeling like it has to be the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong point, I think, particularly around free ports.
Yeah.
They can be tailor-made effectively and for that city region, for that area, that it's not a one-size-fits-all handed down model coming from London. You can shape it and tailor it to what you think your own region needs.
And then you can get into the detail of kind of sub-regional stuff. So we have a devolution deal. Within the devolution deal, we were the first mayoral area to be given powers to set up mayoral development corporations outside of London. We set up the first one outside of London, second to the Olympic Park, and that gave us the old Redcar Steelworks. That set up a very specific project for that piece of land. So again, you could easily translate that and say, well, actually, if you've got a devolution deal, you could have mayoral development corporations to help regenerate town or city centres, you know, areas that require really intensive focus, that are project-led, to set up a specific board to tackle that specific issue. So even within devolution, there's kind of subversions of devolution that really allow you to tackle difficult problems.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and there's things that I think of parts of Belfast that many of us have talked about, that, you know, that type of development corporation could be something that could help enhance the city too. So it's not just having the convening powers and coordinating abilities that's important, and having those powers in your office is crucial, but you've got to have those levers that you can pull as well.
Absolutely. And ultimately, where devolution really succeeds is you've got local leadership and a good structure within the combined authority that allows you to develop a plan for your region. And then you go to government and say, this is a well thought out, well developed plan. It's sensible, it's reasonable. We're not asking for the earth, but we can evidence that you helping us with this investment and us using some of the money that you've given to us autonomously to be able to spend is going to reap the benefits, not just for us, but for the whole of the UK. And that's a very powerful position to be in, because again, it goes back to my point that actually locally, you can go to the centre with solutions, and the centre is always more receptive when you go to them and say, this is a problem and here's the solution, rather than here's the problem, can you sort it out for us? And that makes a big difference.
And just maybe one final question. You were re-elected recently, back in May. You got 72% of the vote, which is phenomenal performance for anybody anywhere. But for those who are listening, maybe you're a Conservative mayor in the north of England, and you know that was one of those big standout results on election day back in May. But you know, and there are lots of factors that contribute to a result like that. But to what extent do you think, you know, there is an endorsement of that kind of proactive local leadership, and how much of it, you know, is a sense of an endorsement of devolution? Because that was the end of your first term, I think, that right in saying. And you know, and do you see then, you mentioned potential of devolution to county councils, but do you see your powers expanding? And as was one of the points that we've highlighted in the report, is that Belfast and local authorities in Northern Ireland are quite far behind their UK counterparts, and then, you know, that gap might get more if there are further powers devolved. So, you know, was there a sense, did you get a sense on the campaign trail people thought having local power and local hands was a good thing, and it was a bit of an endorsement of that? And do you see a demand for more?
I think that people probably don't see it as nuanced as that. I think what they see is, originally in 2017, I think it was fair to say that the vast majority just saw it as another level of bureaucracy, another politician that we don't really want and have to pay for. And we've worked hard to be able to show that people can now physically and tangibly point to and see things and touch things that would not have happened but for devolution. And over the last 4 years, people have been on a journey that now there is a recognition that this is something that is going to help. And it's about empowering local people to take decisions for themselves, feeling like they can more directly contact and feel and touch the people responsible for the decisions that are being taken. But ultimately, I mean, the result in May, you know, politics is all about luck, it's circumstance, it's timing. But I absolutely think that devolution is here to stay. It is here to stay. I think people are very supportive of it now. But one of the really important things that helped us get to this stage, which I didn't know was ever going to be the case, but certainly did turn out to be the case, is with elected mayors, regional mayors like myself, people do see you as a mayor first and then a Conservative or a Labour politician second. You are seen as a mayor being, in effect, the titular civic leader of that region first, and then a lot of people will say to me, yeah, he's a great, yeah, he happens to be a Tory, but he's a really good mayor. So they think of you as the mayor first and then think, oh yeah, and he's a Tory as well. Whereas with it being an MP, for instance, it's automatically the way around. It's like you are a Conservative MP or a Labour MP. And that really helps you because it gives you a bit of breathing space to be able to make developments. And also, you are also one step removed from the hard politics, certainly the hard national politics that often plays out at various levels of government and local politics as well, actually. So there is a great space that you can create. And actually, as long as you force it a little bit and say, look, I'm not interested in the wider politics. I am wholly parochial. I am only interested in what's good for my local area. I leave the other politics to other people. And as a mayor, that's what I should be doing. And people buy into that because certainly in England, you know, mayors haven't, other than there being usually a man with a gold chain and a pointy hat, people don't really understand what mayors are. whereas people are now starting to associate them with that more kind of American style executive mayor. And so they see you as that kind of more, yeah, he's the mayor of Teesside first, and by the way, he's part of a political party, but they are more forgiving as a result. So as long as you deliver, I often hear, well, I don't really care that you're a Tory, you get things done. And if you can demonstrate that through devolution, then you can make that break with traditional party lines, and people then start to vote on the issues, not exclusively, but more so than along party lines.
Ben Houchen, well, thank you for your time. Thanks for giving a bit more of an insight into what you're doing in Tees Valley and how devolution is working for your region. And on behalf of Belfast Chamber and our members, wish you the best in the work that you have ahead of you. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So hopefully you found that interesting and as well as enjoyable. And we're now going to move on to a discussion with our panel. Just to remind everybody, that's Lisa O'Kane from Milgill, Lee Reynolds and Ben Harper, the research manager at Pivotal. In her presentation, Anne mentioned those questions that we wanted to hope that this stimulates. So there is a question and answer function. So if anything that Anne has said or indeed anything that the mayor said has created a question in your mind, please put it into that question and answer function, and I'll try to put them to the panel. There's a lot to digest in all of this, so we're going to do our best over the next 20 minutes or so to unwrap some of it. And Lisa, maybe start with you. And for people who don't know, NILGA are a representative organisation for local government in Northern Ireland, and we've long supported more devolution to local councils like Belfast. So there is that, I suppose, political support at different levels for empowerment of councils. And the Belfast City Council back in July passed a motion calling for more regeneration powers. So, yeah, what's fueling that? What has been behind that constant sort of call by local government for more powers? And is there do you think there is a strong political appetite for greater devolution?
I think the appetite will depend really on who you ask. For the public, there's probably indifference, but what they do want is to have really good, cost-effective, responsive and reliable public services. They don't really care about who's delivering them. They do know, however, that their closest links are with the local council and councillor, and this was particularly evident during COVID. I suppose politically there's an acceptance that we can't continue with a stop-start assembly. Only 5% of public spending in Northern Ireland isn't controlled by the executive, and certainly many of council's strategic partners, for example Carnegie, the Construction Employers Federation, Retail NI, Hospitality Ulster and others, would welcome greater devolution of regeneration and neighbourhood services to councils. I suppose it would allow us, if we had more legislative freedom, more responsibilities and greater financial borrowing, we'd be able to do things faster and deliver better outcomes for our customers. Giving councils something like a greater locality-based decision-making is required to do that. But at the moment, we don't have the critical mass of finances and portfolios to allow it, despite the political will.
Yeah, I think that sort of disconnect of power and ambition and vision is big theme that's come through in the report. And Lee, you've actually spent some time in City Hall for the years. So you've been at the coalface, I suppose, and perhaps seen some of those issues. And again, one of the things that came very strongly through in the research was that sense of slow pace of change, a sense of disconnect. That sort of failure to have maybe localized or very tailored policy. This is something that Ben Houchen touched on, as well as sort of competing priorities. And we've got this sort of odd situation, I think, where you've got City Hall, you've got some of the biggest departments in Northern Ireland just meters away, but yet, they might as well be a million miles away. Was that your experience when you were? You have plenty of experiences in City Hall. Was that one of those experiences that you saw when you were there? And can you understand that sort of that sense that having power closer to people allows you to have that more localized response?
I get the theory. I don't necessarily buy into the potential that the report highlights. Potential isn't a guarantee of performance. And then, we can have a discussion around Belfast, but the issue of local government reform is you're talking about 10 other councils as well. So the potential of one isn't the potential of the other 10. So you get into things like that. The disconnect, the worrying thing about the disconnect is basically it starts at the bottom and goes to the top. And it doesn't seem to be any degree of significant improvement, which is deeply concerning. And for me, leaving aside where a power lies, there's an attitudinal problem. And the attitudinal problem is that Northern Ireland's all right. It's not bad. It's not fantastic. It's just all right. And as long as it's all right and it's taken over, it'll do. And that's the core attitudinal problem we have. Because when a new idea comes along, it's like, yeah, it's fine, but, we don't really need it because we're taking over okay. And that is the attitudinal problem. It isn't that we are so terrible or that we are fantastic. It's just basically Northern Ireland's an all right place. We've got it taken over. Just keep it taken over. And that lack of ambition really feeds into a lot of things. Then you have the disconnect is not only between local government and the executive, even between departments, even within departments, you get people not talking to each other. So the disconnect is a common problem through all levels of government.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good analysis of part of the problem. Yeah, actually, that what you've said there resonates with one of the questions that's come in from Gareth Neal at Portview Trade Centre and east of the city around skills to deliver, and maybe that's something you want to elaborate on a little bit, Lee, and back to you, Lisa, on it as well. I understand the point that Gareth's making, but maybe again, it's that sort of like we don't believe that we can do this. And we'll come on to maybe sort of different models in a minute or two, but that feeling that maybe the theory might work, or it looks like it works somewhere else, but it's not going to work here. That is keeping a bit of a ceiling on our development, isn't it? Lee, do you want to start on that now? Back to Lee.
Yeah.
Lisa.
It is, and there's also another theme from Ben's stuff around leadership. It's the ability of our disparate council model to provide leadership. Also, politically, Belfast City Council isn't in a very healthy place right now to put its place, to take forward a true leadership role. It's just the impact of election results is the honest answer there. And what we're seeing it delivering is very much the legacy of when it did have more of a political consensus and role and vision that was common. And that's slowly but surely breaking down. Now, that re-emphasizes the importance of delivering those pieces like the city deal that were developed in that time and delivering the plan, but it makes me concerned for the future.
Lisa, just on that point around skills to deliver, I suppose that there's a lot of experience within local government in Belfast and across Northern Ireland, but perhaps it isn't located there at the moment, not least because those powers aren't there. So is it a sort of maybe a sense of build it and they will come?
I think a lot of the councils are doing things under the radar that people don't realise anyway. Even just looking at regeneration, the councils are heavily involved in designing and delivering schemes that are within the powers of DFC. Regeneration schemes involve local council input. And a lot of the time they'll be doing a lot of the consultations with the public and traders. I think it's also interesting to note that MHCLG, who are running the Community Renewal Fund and the Shared Prosperity and Levelling Up Fund, they seem to think that councils have the powers they seem to think that councils have the skills because they've bypassed the departments and gone straight to councils for applications on regeneration. So I don't think the skills gap is as big as we'd be led to believe.
Thanks, Lisa. And that Ministry for Housing and Communities and Local Government has an interesting new Secretary of State in the last 24 hours with Michael Gove, or somebody who other people like him or not, and he drives agenda. So it'll be interesting to see how that does develop. And Ben, if I maybe come to you around the evidence, just before we move on to some of those sort of different models of delivery, the evidence that from the research around leadership and the importance of leadership. And it's not to say that leadership doesn't exist, but that it is less empowered leadership here. The importance of suppose, soft power, convening power, bringing people together. I think Lisa's point is it's a very good one. We certainly in Belfast Chamber have seen council officers in Belfast working really, really tirelessly, backed by their councillors, to deliver change in the city, certainly around the pandemic. But that disconnect that we talked about is a big issue. So that sense of, what was the evidence around leadership and the centrality of that to making big change happen?
Sure. I guess just to say that, just go back a point there, just around Lee's idea around, Lisa's idea around skills. I would agree with that, and there are really good, lots of evidence of good practice in Belfast and beyond, but maybe linked to the vignette that we just seen there around Tees Valley, that leadership and accountability is key to success. And, arguably one would say that's key in any business or any good endeavor, that the focus has to be very clear. And I would say the evidence that we reviewed was that the biggest challenge was the layers of administration and management that exist when you don't have very clear decision-making powers. And I think one of the challenges would be that when you aren't directly accountable, it's difficult then to see where the buck stops and where you influence, where the points of influence of the private sector. So if we look, for example, at Glasgow, the Glasgow City Region deal has been extremely successful. And I would argue one of the successes of that deal is that they have involved council leaders within their decision-making. And that feels really inclusive from a, societal perspective, because you have local elected councillors having key roles in development. And I would see that really leading to a sense of people having a say, because I guess whilst we have our very unique political situation in Northern Ireland, I do think there's an appetite for change. Yes, there are lots of obstacles and challenges around that, but I guess maintaining the status quo in Belfast will be a challenge, or broader Northern Ireland, given the speed of recovery required following the pandemic.
Yeah, I think the Glasgow example is one well worth looking at. It's political, yes, but a bit less political in Tees Valley and other places, and more a looser confederation of councils building on their city deal. And Lee, that brings me then to those sort of different models of delivery. And I thought what Ben Houchen said was fascinating. The clarity of purpose that there is, that this is all about delivering economic growth and regeneration, and just driving that in a way which you call the private sector orientated, about doing the heavy lifting, taking that away from local authorities so that they had the freedom to get on with their statutory responsibilities. And you were in City Hall when the city deal was negotiated and agreed, and that was that recognises that Belfast is the centre of a wider city region where there's codependency rather than competitiveness. But those other models around free ports, mayoral development corporations, whatever we land on or go for, you do see these other city regions who are fundamentally our competitors seizing these opportunities and driving those forward, either to regenerate parts of their cities or around their ports or whatever. What do you think the potential of that is, but also I suppose that appetite, and is it maybe, if more devolution or combined authority is not the way to go, is that something that you could see actually as a useful substitute in circumstances?
To some degree, with me, with these ideas, I don't. It's the old line from The West Wing. You pull all the levers. I often don't see this as we're going to go with this idea or that idea. If we are going to take Northern Ireland from being all right to a great place, a fantastic place, then we're going to be trying to do as many of them as we can to drive innovation, to drive Northern Ireland forward. You take the example of free ports. What we should have done was, the offer was coming from the national government. We should have sat down and written the Northern Ireland free port proposal, where we were putting together a multi-site, multimodal proposal spread across different parts of Northern Ireland, targeting areas of poverty, targeting areas of economic decline, but also building on new industries. That's what we should have done. Now, government had a role in that. The places that wanted had a role in that. Now, what we did instead was NERP, whinge, and drag our feet. The end result then was the Treasury then went, here's the 8 in England. And then people complained that the Treasury went ahead without us. Well, if you're showing no interest, they're not going to hold themselves back. So that was a core problem. It also was a symbol of, it's a good idea being killed for other reasons. We have a civil service that has a devolved institution that can pass legislation, but still runs itself as if it's a direct rule civil service. And, free ports involve primary legislation. They hate primary legislation. They run a mile. There was an aspect of politics to it as well. DFP was in the lead. Sinn Féin aren't so keen on the private sector. There's also, it's seen as a benefit of Brexit. Therefore, the anti-Leave parties weren't keen on a benefit of Brexit progressing. But it was basically, again, we were allowing a poverty of vision and aspiration and unimportant things to get in the way of something that could have been big and positive and done. It's also one of those proposals that if a free port doesn't particularly succeed, it's at very little cost to government. A lot of a free port is you designate some land, which probably wasn't being utilised particularly well anyway. Largely its role is getting government out of the way. And so therefore it's one of those ideas. It's the risk factor for government isn't particularly high. Otherwise, if it fails, it fails. But if it succeeds, it's good for you. So this is for me is the issue with these things of, we're allowing too much lack of vision, lack of drive and pettiness to get in the way of the multiple things that would actually transform here and drive innovation. Now, I would also, I've been very nasty to government. I must also say about beyond government, whenever I was wandering around Northern Ireland talking to people about free ports, there were some people who had worked hard and thought about it and developed very interesting proposals. There were others who had been shouting about it for years. And whenever you asked them for the proposal, they didn't have one. They just wanted one. And then you had others who, when they'd been asked, said no. And then whenever they thought it might happen, suddenly came to the party late and went, oh, well, if there's going to be one, we want one. So there was this poverty, not just limited to government. And, for the motor be driving at full capacity, we need all parts of the engine driving it at full capacity.
I see. If maybe very quickly to you, I'm always encouraging you into politics. You've done so uninvited already, but really, and just very briefly around it. I can hear people already say, almost the line that Ben Houchen used: we don't need another elected politician. We don't need any. So I think we're very, very clear that this is a thought piece from ourselves and Pivotal is to stimulate this type of conversation. But there's a particular, I suppose, attraction for a business organisation like ours who want to see Belfast do well, want to see it flourish, to the kind of combined authority model, which seems to be like building on the city, and not that it's depoliticised. The Glasgow model is less political and it's worth looking at, but that it's about that heavy lifting. It's that sort of it's about helping councils to deliver on their ambitions. Do you see merit in the exploration of that concept?
There is potential merit in it. The challenge I would give to councils, and it's what's missing in their argument at the minute, is there's been a number of reports produced going, here's more things we could be given. Yeah, there's lots of things you could or couldn't be given. But the issue, the demonstration I think they have to make is we went through a process of local government reform. They were given new powers. They were given new responsibilities. They were given targets around efficiencies and all the rest of it. They need to go through all that and show that it worked, show the delivery and show the positives that flowed from that. And that reinforces their case. I think from being around local government and sort of knowledge of some others, I think there's a reluctance to do that because there's some areas that it didn't work. But I have no problem with giving more powers to somebody where something previously didn't work if they've identified what went wrong and have identified how to fix it. So that doesn't necessarily need to be a barrier to further action and further development. But I think that is what is missing from the council's case at the minute, a clear demonstration of you gave us these new things and we have done more with them than you were doing. And we have done it at a more better value for money for the taxpayers. That's, I think, what is missing. And then that will reinforce the case for more.
Yeah, I think just to go back to you finally, Lisa, as well, that's an interesting point that Lee makes. But, there's clearly a desire that, at a local government level, for that local, very sort of tailored type of response to the challenges that we're facing now and potentially in the future as well. And I do get a sense perhaps it's something that you could comment on, that the councils are a lot keener around sort of placemaking, you know, so regeneration is something that, you know, the councils are being increasingly by circumstances, I suppose, invited into, but once they do get into that space, they just don't have the powers to tie things together. So there must be a huge sense of frustration at local government level that there's that demand and desire, but just not that capacity to deliver.
Yeah, there is frustration, and it's the fact of having to go to different departments and different, whether it be local government, national government, regional government, to get things done. Having that one delivery body would be much more better value for residents and for businesses. Just picking up on Lee's point, I think that we'd gladly accept that challenge of demonstrating the benefits of RPA, and yes, putting our hands up when things haven't gone wrong. But I think there's more things that have gone right, and if we can learn from the failures for the future. I just want to pick up as well on the options that you've mentioned as alternative investment. They're all available to councils elsewhere. In addition to their enhanced powers, we're not even at the starting line. We don't have regeneration. So they've got regeneration plus all the rest. And no wonder we're being left behind in terms of economic growth and innovation. In terms of combined authorities, I don't think that's the right solution for here. We're probably too small. Population and scale is really important for those combined authorities. I think the answer is really give the 11 councils proper power and resources and legislation, give us a devolution bill in the next mandate with core powers, and with secondary powers then if councils want to go on and, if specific councils want to go on and do something in addition, let them have that.
Thank you, Lisa. And final word to you, Ben. And this is an area that research focused on quite a lot. And I suppose one of the things that perhaps take away is that, you know, there is no prescribed best answer for Belfast or indeed anywhere else in Northern Ireland. This is about stimulating a conversation, which we definitely had a little bit of this morning. But, you know, it does seem to be the case from the research, and perhaps you could comment on this, that elsewhere has, at Lisa's point is absolutely right, elsewhere already have, all those other cities who are our competitors have already got more powers, and then they're growing and they're expanding and they're all using these different vehicles. So there is a sense that, you know, that it isn't a one size fits all either. People, whether it's Glasgow or Liverpool or Manchester or Tees Valley, they're all doing something different, but what they're all doing is becoming more empowered, and as a result, places like Belfast are that little bit further behind.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with Lisa's point. You know, really what the evidence would say, it's about bringing powers back from the centre to localised decision making. Something we haven't had time to discuss, but I think is implicit and very clear, is that powers alone are not sufficient. That cities, regions, etc., they need a really ambitious vision linked to long-term strategy. And within Northern Ireland, I'm really conscious that we have the 10 times economy document, the 10 times skills document, and perhaps there is a role for devolved powers linked to those very ambitious strategies in order to deliver them in a successful and strategic way.
Thank you, Ben. And can I thank all of our panelists, and Ben again, and also Lee and Lisa for their time and for sharing their thoughts, and hopefully you know, that is a flavour of that kind of conversation and debate and discussion that we in Belfast Chamber want to stimulate around this issue. Can I also then just finally, before concluding, thank Anne and the team at Pivotal for conducting this research on behalf of Belfast Chamber. Thank you very much for all of the efforts that you have put into this, and you know, we do look forward to working with you again in the future. Again, thank all of our panelists. Can I thank Ben Houchen for his time as well, and can I thank Neil and the team at Planned Events for helping this run so smoothly this morning. Please go to belfastchamber.com, where you can not only download the report and peruse it at your leisure, but also you know, take a look at our upcoming events as well, including the launch of our Belfast Business Survey, which is conducted in conjunction with Belfast City Council. That is next Tuesday afternoon. So thank you all again for participating. Thank you all for attending. I wish you all a good day, good weekend, and look forward to seeing you all again very soon at another Belfast Chamber event. Thank you.